Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday, and this is Seattle Now. Many parts of our economy have struggled during the pandemic, but some businesses have thrived, and not just the big companies like Amazon. In a minute, Seattle Times reporter Katherine Khashimova Long will tell us how they're making it work. But first, let's get you caught up. Officials hope new travel restrictions will help slow a contagious new COVID strain showing up in the UK. Governor Inslee wants anyone traveling to the state from countries with reported cases to quarantine for 14 days and get tested. The BBC says more than 40 countries have restricted travel from the UK. So far, the US isn't one of them. 5 Seattle bridges won't get the earthquake safety upgrades promised in a property tax levy passed by voters in 2015. That includes the Fremont and Ballard bridges and the 4th Avenue South Bridge. Seattle Times reports that the total cost to retrofit 16 bridges has soared to more than 10 times what officials thought it would be. SDOT blames complicated repairs and underground work they weren't planning on. And if your holiday travel plans include a ferry trip, WashDOT is asking you to please think hard about whether you actually need to make it at all. They want the public to limit ridership to essential trips only over the holidays. On top of distancing guidelines in place during the pandemic, many boats will be running on reduced schedules. That means tomorrow and Thursday are likely to be packed. The pandemic has been painful for the economy, for people's jobs, and their livelihoods. Applications for unemployment are at a 3-month peak nationally. It's been a crushing year for millions, but there's always a flip side. Seattle Times business reporter Katherine Khashimova Long has been speaking to Seattle businesses that have found ways to pivot during the pandemic. Katherine, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So the pandemic upended so much for business owners, but for some, it's worked out. Tell me what you found out in your reporting.
Well, as the economy has transitioned to cope with the pandemic, and as people have changed their lives and their spending habits and even their places of residence, there have been some, I would almost say, unexpected places of hope and places where growth has continued or even accelerated as the pandemic has gone on. So my colleague Paul Roberts and I chatted with a few of these businesses, and we found that in some corners of the economy, things are booming.
In some cases, it was actually the unique circumstances of the pandemic that worked in these companies' favor. Tell me who's doing well and how they managed to make the most of a bad situation.
Right. One business that really sticks out to me is Wild Alaskan Seafood. It's owned by Aaron Kallenberg, who's a third-generation fishmonger, although he came to the business via the tech industry. And early on in the pandemic, he was actually a little worried about his business's fortunes. What Wild Alaskan does is it sells fish direct to consumers. It's a subscription service where once a month you get a delivery of fresh wild Alaskan salmon or cod or halibut straight to your doorstep. And as people flooded into grocery stores in the beginning of the pandemic, panic buying everything off the shelves, the facilities that were packaging and labeling Aaron's fish were also flooded with orders from grocery stores. And Aaron, I mean, if you pardon the pun, he's something of a little fish in a big pond. And he was worried that his shipments were going to get squeezed out by this much larger demand from large retail grocery chains. But what actually happened is that, as you mentioned, the unique circumstances of the pandemic vaulted his business into quadrupling in size by November. What he said is that it's not that there was a pandemic and people woke up wanting to buy fish online. It's actually that his company had done a lot of research into who would be the ideal buyer of their fish before the pandemic. And then when digital advertising rates fell in March and April, they were able to just spend a ton more money on digital advertising. There was also the fact that he has an all-American supply chain. Some of his competitors don't. They rely on foreign imports for things like packaging, styrofoam containers, or dry ice. And he buys all of that locally. And that means that he was able to succeed when some of his competitors were having a really hard time.
Fascinating. So it was a case of right business, right time. Advertising rates were low, his supply chain was solid, and he was able to take advantage of this situation. Katherine, last time we talked, we explored the shift in people moving out of the city, looking for different things, that downtown was no longer the draw it was for the money. That has given a bump to the bottom line in moving companies, right?
That's right. My colleague Paul Roberts spoke to a bunch of moving companies who said that they were seeing unprecedented demand for their services, not only as people are moving out of the city, but also as people are just moving into new places. Apartment buildings, as I reported last month, are having bonkers deals. You can get as much as 3 months of free rent from some apartment buildings downtown. That's prompting some people to move even within their buildings. They're going from a lower floor maybe to a higher floor because they can afford more space now.
You know, what's interesting is we keep hearing that this is going to be a K-shaped recovery. You know, this was not an easy city to live in prior to the pandemic for certain people.
That's right. What we're seeing is that the pandemic has concentrated a lot of wealth and growth in sectors that are obvious, right? Cloud computing, for one, Amazon, Microsoft, they're doing great. Other sectors, retail, restaurants, hotels, really feeling a hit. What our reporting showed is that even within the sectors that, you know, are neither doing great nor suffering, there are some small instances of economic growth. Pockets of growth, I would say.
It's a holiday week. Christmas is coming. I've been seeing a lot of people trying to buy local, trying to stay close to home when it comes to gift shopping this year. What are you hearing about people's holiday spending?
Overall, we know that holiday spending is down slightly over last year and over analyst expectations. We also know that online spending is way up. Amazon is not reporting overall figures for its online spending, but it has said that among the third-party sellers that use its marketplace platform, spending is up 60% over last year in the first few days of the online shopping season. But your point about the shop local movement is well taken. I just got off the phone with a pet store worker, a locally owned pet store chain, All the Best, who said that they're seeing really strong sales, not only because of the pandemic puppy boom, but also because a lot of their customers are really invested in shopping locally.
It's interesting to see the changes, Katherine, that the economy is moving forward in new and different ways. Some of these changes will probably stick around, and some of them are likely to be reflective of changes that we have made personally as individuals throughout this pandemic. I wonder how businesses are thinking about the future right now.
That's right. Some of these changes are definitely going to stick around. Paul spoke to moving companies again who said that they were seeing COVID breakup moves. As people started to work from home, they realized that their house was too small for the two of them. Those types of changes are unlikely to reverse. But I think some people who move out to the countryside might realize as the pandemic goes on that the countryside is not too exciting. That's what happened to me. I moved out to way up north from Seattle, and you know, it was nice for a time. And then as grocery stores started to close earlier and earlier, and the amount of daylight started getting less and less, I moved back down to Columbia City because I love it down here. The city is where things happen.
Katherine, you did?
I did.
Fascinating. What do we know about the forecast for Seattle's economy heading into 2021? What are we seeing?
We're seeing a tough year ahead. We know it's going to be hard. There have been hundreds of business closures just going off of the Downtown Seattle Association's accounting of how many businesses have closed. The federal stimulus package that was just agreed upon is expected to provide some relief, but probably, frankly, not enough to get us back to where we were before we started the pandemic.
Yeah, we're hearing an awful lot about how that relief is just a drop in the bucket for the people who truly, truly need it.
I think that's right. I see people sharing memes of tossing a bucket of water onto a raging fire and saying, this is what a $600 stimulus check looks like.
Yeah, long way to go. Katherine Khashimova Long is Seattle Times business reporter. Always great to talk to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me, Trish.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. The show is produced by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Clare McGrane, Sophie Reed, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow. As this memorable year comes to an end, it's good to know we got through it together. KUOW has been able to bring you programming that broadens your perspective, thanks to our members who step up to support this work. If KUOW has been there for you at some point in the past year, consider making a financial gift to ensure a new year of telling important stories about our community. Use the link in our description to make your gift today. And thanks.